Hello and
So,
welcome back to the Villa podcast. I'm here as always, my good friend Dan Wiseman. Dan, it's looking like Steven Gerrard is heading to Aston Villa right now. So we thought we would do a tactical analysis, breakdown, everything you need to know, an informer on Steven Gerrard as a manager. But before we get into that, mate, how are you doing?
very good, mate. Very good. It's we always like to come to Villa fans, and the Villa fans are a nervy fan base, aren't we? There's always a lot of tension, and we're definitely a glass half empty mob here in B6. I'd like to think that you and I, mate, we do our best to address that, don't we? Even when perhaps we've got little doubts ourselves, we try and see past them. Always try and bring the good news, the stuff, the positive stuff that people want to hear. That just calms the nerves a little bit, and hopefully we can do that. Hopefully we can do that because there's as we will go into in this podcast, mate, there's completely, we do understand. And, you've had yourself, you voiced on the podcast, a little bit of concerns. I've had concerns myself about why Stevie might be a bit of a risk. But hopefully we're going to come here and just address both the why it might be a risk, but other reasons why perhaps it's more sensible than people think.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think you're totally right. I've allowed myself in the days since Dean's dismissal to get more excited about this as it's happened. I mean, Dan, you were on WM the other day talking about Gerrard as well, weren't you?
Yep.
And how you saw that going. Funnily enough, that same evening, I was on Five Live telling Mark Chapman and Mika Richards that I wanted Fonseca. So don't I look stupid? But here we are, Steven Gerrard. It's something that I am willing to get behind 100%. And we're going to give you the reasons why. We're going to give you some history. Listen, I'm not going to sit here and claim to be an expert on Scottish football or Rangers. Fortunately, though, Dan, you are somewhat more well equipped in this scenario. Good friend of the podcast, Scott, he's a
Yep.
Rangers fan. I've got a few mates who are Rangers fans. Shout out to Chris. So we do come at this with some context that I think a lot of people might not know. So we're going to try and break it down how Steven Gerrard has played during his sort of 3-year spell at Rangers. Look at how he could set up Aston Villa and just overall assess whether we think that this is a good appointment or not. But I think, given the excitement that I think you guys are seeing, and it's probably a notable difference in the last podcast, which was obviously the dismissal of Dean Smith. We're fairly excited about this one, aren't we, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, before we go into the deep tactical stuff, which is, a big part of any managerial appointment and going to be a big part of this podcast, I think the one thing that we can unanimously agree on in this is the person that we're bringing in, the brutal, the standards that this guy's going to bring in, the expectations, the drive, the sheer will to succeed and to win that this guy has. You hear so many ex-pros talk about, that have played for Liverpool, talk about what Steven expected in every training session from every player, how we judge players off the first 15 minutes of a training session, write them off. And it's like, the guy is going to expect nothing but the absolute best. And I think when you've got players who we've seen in Villa sort of come drift in and out of form. You've seen players that show up one game that look, you know the names. I don't need to sit here and reel them off. Guys that have been plagued by inconsistency. Those kind of things, which have in certain games been the downfall of Aston Villa. Hopefully, will be no more. And you've got to look at the likes for John, for Douglas, for even guys down to like Carney and young JJ, to have Steven Gerrard as your manager and to learn your midfield craft from one of the greatest midfielders the Premier League has seen. What an experience for them. And I think, as I said, before we get into the tactics and all of that, from a man, the person that we're bringing in that sense, you can't really do much better, I don't think.
No, you can't. And I think it kind of lends us to talk about someone who we'd let go of in the summer, John Terry. Now, interestingly, I think, with all the talk, the bookies were sort of taking bets on whether JT would be the man. Obviously, he left for the option to pursue his own managerial career and to learn from coaches around Europe and the world, which I don't think we've really seen too much of. It looks like he's been on the golf course a fair bit, but fair play, JT. It's safe to say you've earned it. But I think what strikes me as a massive difference between the two, And because you can see why at face value, two complete legends of the game, specifically in England and the Premier League, two of the very best in the respective positions, and have had, some of the best careers that I think, we've seen in the Premier League and probably will ever see, especially when you look at John Terry, a serial winner. John Terry would come into this job at a really awkward position whereby he'd been teammates with, a good few members of this squad, and then being the assistant to the regional manager, being the Dwight Schrute of the coaching staff, having that kind of relationship with the players that is completely different. So managerial one. He kind of enters, and it's probably at a disadvantage because normally you would say someone who knows the club coming in, you can hit the ground running straight away. But with John Terry, I think having personal relationships, it's always going to be quite difficult. And I mean, I think we may even see this at Barcelona down with Xavi, taking over the likes of Sergio Busquets and Gerard Piqué, Jordi Alba, all ex-teammates. It's going to be very difficult. And Steven Gerrard, on the other hand, he's going to be coming in potentially, and everybody is at a level playing field. Everybody's instantly going to respect the man as the manager. Also, of course, Steven Gerrard as the player, but that authority that he would demand from being the manager from day one, not really knowing any of these players personally, aside from Danny Ings, of course. I think it's just levels above. And yeah, you're right. I think as a man, and we've seen his willingness to win, the determination he'd shown all throughout his career. Safe to say, ruined our childhood, Dan. So let's hope he can make our adolescent years better.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Absolutely. And I think, he's done a lot of time, obviously Rangers wasn't his first managerial gig as such. He was managing in the youth ranks at Liverpool. So no doubt he's going to understand just how important the project we've got going on in the academy as well. That's obviously a big part of the Villa job at the moment, and give credit to Dean. One of the, real legacies that he left on the club is the academy that flourished underneath him when he was at the club. But, I think, that's where the comparisons begin, I think, between Steve and Dean. And I think probably the reason why Gerrard is looking like he's going to be the Aston Villa manager is because of the system that he plays. Throughout his time in management, Gerrard's long shown a preference for a 4-3-3. He's also used a 4-2-3-1. I mean, who does that sound like? Obviously up in Scotland, it's easier to play this kind of way, but he's consistently promoted this very attacking, possession-based football, favours very technically gifted players, particularly on the wings. And this is, again, where his style of play is suited to the Villa squad, because he likes those unnaturally sided wingers, so those inverted ones that can come off their flank onto their stronger foot to provide a threat on goal. You think Ryan Kent, Yanis Hadji, those kind of guys that have really perhaps been, when he took over, it was very much the Alfredo show up in Scotland. And now there is more of a holistic squad there. You've got the likes of Kent and Hadji, and Joe Aribo has gone up there in first as well. I know he's not a winger, but these creative technical players are who he really fancies. And I think it would have taken a lot for Stevie to come away from that Rangers job. They're in a really crucial point in the season. This is why all the Rangers fans are annoyed. They've got a Scottish Cup final, 2 Europa League games, and an Old Firm coming up after the international break. And I don't think he would have left. The squad was right. I don't think it's just a matter of the club. I think it's the squad as well. And I think clearly the way that we play, the way that the squad was built, because those formations are the ones that Dean played, the way that the squad is at the moment does lend itself to Stevie's, the philosophy that he is creating. I think it's fair to call it at this point.
Yeah, what's quite interesting in sort of doing research about how Stevie likes to line his teams up and stuff like that. One of the things that really stood out is how he uses those wingers, Dan, as you've alluded to. And I've seen the term bandied round that he actually prefers to call them, his 2 number 10s rather than 2 wingers, because they're challenged to sort of be the creative spark, but in that sort of inside forward role, which is something that I religiously bang on about on this podcast, and nobody seems to understand when I'm coming from when I draw these comparisons with Liverpool. Sadio Mane and Mohamed Salah are not wingers. They are not. They are strikers who occupy wide spaces. They're forwards. of course they're going to be making.
Getting Football Manager was the best thing you ever did, mate.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of which, we need to bring that back, Dan. We need to bring back Morgan and Wise. But you know, then they're not traditional wingers. Or even, you know, wingers by the sort of 2021 standard. If you're looking at a Riyad Mahrez, a Raheem Sterling, Lucas Moura, I was about to say Heung-min Son, but he kind of fits the same bill as Salah and Mane. They're you know, touchline wingers with pace who are going to look to get to the byline, whip a ball into the box with their stronger foot. When you look at Salah and Mane, these guys are just scoring an insane amount of goals. And why is that? Because they're not told to stand and hug the touchline. Villa have the players capable of playing this exact system. And as you said, Dan, Hadji, Ryan Kent, players like that. We've even seen Ajiri, I think that's how you pronounce his name, a young lad from Liverpool. He's occupied them spaces sometimes as well. You know, when called upon and when there's been some injuries from what I'm seeing online. So it's a system that fundamentally, you know, whilst he is comfortable playing it and has got a very good squad playing it as well. And when you look at, you know, as you referred to, Dan, Morelos, they've even had Jermaine Defoe up there as well. There's a focal point to that attack. Aston Villa have that. Danny Ings, of course, he's not a bruiser like Alfredo Morelos. And, you know, he certainly has a much more in check temper. But to have a focal point like Danny Ings with players like Buendia, Bailey, El Ghazi, Traore, Watkins, who can all occupy the sort of inside forward, 2 number 10s, wingers, however you want to look at it, Steven Gerrard's going to love that.
Yeah, the one name that stands out for me when you run through that list, mate, is Buendia, because he is a player that I think really can occupy those positions that you were talking about, especially in wide areas. It's not just down to him. You know, I'm going to be interested to see how he uses Ings and stuff like that, and Watkins, because he's lent a lot on Kemar Roof to bring that additional striker that sort of plays as that inside forward that you mentioned, mate. That's not really a natural position for him, but that Roof has flourished in up in Scotland. You know, he can move into those narrow positions, create space then for the fullbacks. And every week we go on Twitter, mate, how many James Tavernier free kicks, goals, assists, his numbers over the last 3 seasons have been crazy. That's the effort that the fullbacks need to be putting in this Gerrard system, because Borna Barisic, who came very much as an unknown into this Rangers team, and actually Rangers fans took a long time to get used to Borna Barisic. They didn't like him at first, but because of the system that Gerrard plays and the emphasis that he puts on his fullbacks, the numbers that they can get, because those wide spaces are no longer occupied by those wingers who keep trying to come inside, are crazy. But this is where I have my first hitch, because whilst I think Matty Cash, and I'm not going to say Matty Cash is going and putting up like Tavernier numbers, because Tavernier is getting like 30 goals and assists a season.
Yeah.
But I have more faith in him than in Tiggs. Tiggs, I don't think, is necessarily struggled to that bombing on, especially when the wingers coming inside, because the best we've seen of Tiggs is when he had Jack to provide the overlaps, and when there's 2 on that wing and you haven't got one coming inside when, you know, you are playing a more traditional system. That's where we've seen the best of Tiggs. Not to say that he can't do it, but I think it might take him perhaps a little bit longer to get used to that system, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, as I was saying at the top, mate, I think you're going to see fullbacks coming through, not just into wide positions, but in central ones too. There's a midfield, because there's so much going on ahead of them with the fullbacks, with the wingers coming in. They are a little bit more cautious. You don't, you know, the Rangers side, you don't see many explosive, powerful runs coming forward from midfielders, because most of the time their paths are blocked by the amount of, you know, there's a lot going on ahead of them. So it is more of a reserve midfield. But that's where I think, you know, you've got to rely on your technical sides, like your Louises and stuff like that. And I keep mentioning Carney. I'm really excited to what he can do under this system when, you know, there's a bit more of a solidarity in that midfield. I'm interested to see how McGinn fits into this, because, you know, as Villa fans keep crying for, he is better when he gets into those attacking situations. So hopefully that isn't nullified and there's a way to work around it. But it seems that on the whole, that it's a system that suits Villa. My only question is how transferable are, because Rangers in Scotland, they'll go and sit on the halfway line in a game. They'll go and press the opposition all over the pitch, sit on the halfway line, play a high line, be expansive, be expressive, because 9 times out of 10, you have to play on the front foot. You have to go into every game and have 60, 70% possession. That's the standards that Rangers expect now as champions. You can't go and do that you can try. I mean, by all means, give it a go, Stevie. But you do, I doubt there's going to be too many games where Villa are going to go and be sitting on the halfway line in away games and pressing all over the pitch. You have to temper your playing style for the Premier League, because they are, I'm not going to, call it. I don't personally believe that the Scottish League is as bad as people say. There's a lot of good players that do come from there, but the way that Rangers are expected to play and the way that Villa are expected to play are 2 very different things. So that's going to have to be changed, and I think that's going to have to be altered slightly. But I think, given the nature of a shape and a 4-2-3-1, you can do that. You can do that. You can spot the right times to go and win back. You can set the right press triggers. That sort of pressing high and dropping into a mid block, forcing the ball wide. I think that's generally transferable, and I think hopefully anyway, that can be something about Gerrard that he can figure out early, and that's the thing, is that how quickly he can make that, because the Villa fans are going to need some winning over, mate. And I don't think the Villa fans are by any means wholly sold on Gerrard, so we're going to need to hit the ground running, and it's important that we can nail these things early doors.
Absolutely. I think that's, part of the reason why Dean was let go. I think looking ahead, Dean could have got things right. I do believe that, if I'm being honest, with Brighton and Palace, of course, they're going to be difficult fixtures because they are good teams. So this isn't, writing them 2 off, but he couldn't ask for 2 more convenient starting games, could he? If and when he is eventually appointed for Aston Villa. But it's interesting you say that about the midfield, Dan, because there is going to be a lot of responsibility on your sort of outside midfielders in helping create an overload in that wide position, so as the fullbacks can sort of bomb forward. And I think that's where Target will need that reassurance, whether it's to McGinn or a Louise or what have you. Playing with the inside forwards, you kind of, the game there is to draw the centre backs out and create that sort of space in behind, isn't it? That if you've got your Douglas Luiz, it's sort of in line with a Matt Target, then that kind of it gives the opposition fullback something different to think about, and they have to decide who they're going to go for, if they're going to go for the centre mid or the fullback. So I think Cash, as you said, mate, Cash will 100%. He's going to hit the ground running, man. I think he's going to be an absolute dream for Stevie G. And as well, shout out to Matty Cash out with Poland at the moment. Hopefully we get to see him in some qualifying. I think they play Spain, don't they? Poland soon. But yeah, I think it's the role that this midfield will have in terms of protecting the back 4 as well is going to be quite interesting, because I think it's fair to say, Dan, the midfield has been an area in which we've probably struggled the most. And I think that's kind of evidenced in the amount of goals and sort of chances that we've conceded from sloppily losing the ball in the midfield, kind of stitching the defence. So, this is a defence that kept 18 clean sheets last season, 17 clean sheets, sorry. So to suddenly go to conceding as many goals as we are at the moment, the defence isn't really the problem. I think it's the midfield. I think that's quite evident from performances from last season as well. I think, who do you think, Dan, and this is a question for the comments as well, so let us know in the comments down below, guys, who do you think Stevie G is going to absolutely get the most out of? Because, I think as we kind of alluded to at the top, Dan, with the wide players for Villa, I think it's going to be really interesting to see who he picks, especially as, if he's coming in during an international break, he's going to be stuck with the likes of Keenan Davis, with El Ghazi. There's a lot of players who have gone away on international duty. So it's going to be really interesting to see the fringe players, how much of an impact they can make, because I'm sure he'll be aware of the starting 11 and who they're playing. I think that would have kind of been briefed within the first form of contact. But who do you think could potentially stand out? Could be a starting 11 player, could be someone who's on the fringes. that I think that you think Gerrard will get the most out of?
It's a good question, mate. It's a good question. I think the general intensity that he plays with will suit a lot of players. I think players like McGinn are much better when they're playing on the front foot, and that he's playing with that tenacity and he's going after games. And I think the way that Gerrard's sides are usually very aggressive, I think that'll suit him loads. But not to sort of repeat what I was saying earlier, but I have to look at the wingers, especially the new guys. I look particularly at Bailey and Buendia as two people that I think will be shown a lot of faith in. I think, Steven Gerrard knows all about Leon Bailey. And this is something that I'll come on to later when I talk about sort of his exploits in Europe. But him and Buendia, I really think are very well suited. And I think they can play that sort of inside, especially Buendia, that sort of inside when he's coming in and off the right, being creative, being expressive, allowed to get tight to players and play those 1-2s and nice little passes and those flicks and touches, which we've seen glimpses of at Villa Park. I think that's really going to suit him. I feel sorry for Buendia because, this is probably one of my biggest criticisms of Dean this season, is that I think we've really mishandled the way that we've expected Buendia to, the way that we keep trying to play him as a 10, and it's just clear it's just not really working for him there. Hopefully it's a new lease of life for him, because I do feel sorry for him, mate. I do feel sorry for him because I don't think he's had particularly the most enjoyable first few games at his new club, and there's a lot of pressure on him being the club's record signing to come in and do good things for us. And so hopefully, I'm just trying to be optimistic here, mate. Hopefully it's good things for Emi Buendia.
Absolutely, and as you alluded to, I think one thing that has to be considered, I think, on both sides of the argument when it comes to Steven Gerrard, is the experience and the sort of relevant experience. Now, as you said, youth coach at Liverpool, he's taken the job. He's in his third year currently at Rangers, of course, still at the club at the time of recording this. And I think there are fair questions being asked about the sort of the level, the intensity, the quality specifically of the Scottish League, which I think are more than fair. But this is a man who has taken Rangers to European football after a bloody awful 10 years supporting Rangers. He's brought back the sort of the glory days. Obviously, stopping Celtic from winning 10 in a row as well, which is probably, regardless of whatever happens from this situation, got him in the history books. Currently 4 points clear at the top of the league as well. Some big games coming up, Dan. How relevant is this experience? I guess is the question that I'm going to ask, because I think a lot of people, and rightfully so, are asking for an elite manager. You've got the likes of Simon Jordan on TalkSport saying Villa should be going out for a Conte-esque signing, because the players that we brought in over the summer and the expectations from Christian Purslow and the owners kind of echo the sentiment that Villa are going for the top. And while Steven Gerrard as a name would back that up, as experience, I'm not so sure. But you also have to caveat that down with, Graham Potter was at Ostersund's before he was at Brighton. Everybody has to start somewhere, and I think we're in a situation where, do Villa really need Steven Gerrard right now? I don't think so. But does Steven Gerrard need Villa? Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the big thing, mate. That's the big thing, is that, look, I mean, it's when you go for an experienced managers, for every, you get both sides of the coin. You can sit here and reel off loads of managers that have come in and failed in their first jobs. But you're right. You look at, I'm sure Crystal Palace fans had a lot to say about the experience of Patrick Vieira before he came in. I'm sure Brighton fans had a lot to say about Graham Potter. There's the list goes on and on and on. And that there are examples in the Premier League of when, it wasn't necessarily it must have been a confusing choice at the time. And the one thing, look, I can't sit here and say that he's coming from the most competitive league. No. I think the natural comparison is obviously to Brendan Rodgers. I think Brendan Rodgers, obviously his list of accolades in Scotland is far higher. But Brendan Rodgers, people forget that Rangers, the first season that Brendan Rodgers came to Scotland, Rangers weren't actually in the SPL. So that's not just a 2-horse race. That's very much a 1-horse race. And then even so, they got promoted and they were a newly promoted side. And Rangers showed that, you had a lot of time under the likes of, Mark Warburton, then Graham Murty, Pedro Caixinha. Then you had Graham Murty again. You had a few games under Jimmy Nicholl before Steven Gerrard comes in. So there's like 4 or 5 managers that each got a crack of the whip, some for like only a month or so, sort of. But that whilst all Rangers were going through this turmoil of trying to re-establish themselves in the SPL, Brendan Rodgers was just clocking up titles. And I know that Celtic haven't been in a great place, in the last sort of 18 months or so, but they were in a far better place than Rangers were when Brendan Rodgers was racking up his first few seasons at Celtic. There can be no doubt about that. So what Stevie's done to turn this tide and to turn Rangers back into a title contending side is impressive. I don't think it's enough to particularly quash all the concerns about his experience. But one thing that I think will help to do that is his record in Europe, mate, which with a side like Rangers, no disrespect, is pretty damn remarkable. So, you were talking about the 10 years that Rangers had, mate, just over. Before Steven Gerrard came into the job, Rangers hadn't won a European tie since 2008, which is when they got to the Europa League final. So since Gerrard's come in, he's overseen... this was before, I should caveat that, this is before the start of the Europa League this year. So they're still in the group stage. We can't really take the stats. I think they've only played 2 or 3 games. So before the start of the Europa League this season, to give him sort of a more holistic look, he'd overseen 42 European games, winning 23, drawing 14, and losing just 5. That's pretty damn impressive. And to give that some credit, which is where I talk about he's met Leon Bailey before, 2 of those defeats were against Bayer Leverkusen. So that's an impressive record, mate. And you've got results way there at Porto, you've got results at Benfica, Galatasaray, Lech Poznan, all of these top European sides. They've taken it to Lyon this year in one of their group games. That is, we talk about where we want to see and where this club wants to get in Europe. And I know that a lot of fans would have liked seeing Dean get that crack at the whip, but if you want to talk about experience at that level, Gerrard's got far more than Dean Smith has. And so if that's where we want the club to get to, we can't rule out Gerrard's experience managing in that competition.
Absolutely, mate. It's and if we're being realistic, that is where there's all these reports coming out saying that the 5-year plan. This is a continuation of the 5-year plan. So within the next year and the year after, it's Europe or bust for Stevie G. It's looking like they're reporting if he signs, it's a contract that'll take him up to 2024. Bringing his whole team with him, Dan, as well. Gary McAllister, someone again who knows Aston Villa very well. Michael Beale, who appears to be the brains of the operation. If you guys haven't seen or aren't aware of who Michael Beale is, highly recommend reading up on this guy. He's been everywhere from Europe to South America, and right from the outset, Steven Gerrard knew that he wanted this man as his assistant. There was no hesitations. Potentially a good cop bad cop relationship, from what I'm kind of gauging, Dan. With Beale being the good cop, of course. I think that goes without saying. And even bringing his own set piece specialist potentially in Tom Culshaw. So the whole team could potentially be on its way to Birmingham, Dan, which I think out of everything that we just discussed, Dan, arguably has me the most excited about this.
Yeah. Best thing is that we don't have to have Austin McPhee on corners anymore. So just on that reason and that alone, this is a fantastically shrewd move by Aston Villa. His backroom staff is very, and I've seen a lot of Villa fans sort of expressing some discontent with Gary McAllister, but the guy, like when he was in Villa, really did really well. I saw someone put up his win percentage when he was part of the coaching staff, and he had like an 80-odd% win run. It's like this guy, I know that it was not past the most ideal of circumstances under which he left, but this guy's not a villain. I think there's
not
a lot
in a bad
to
sense, at least.
No, yes, yeah, very, very true, mate. Very true. So yeah, mate, you're absolutely right. That's an exciting backroom staff. And look, I completely understand why people are a bit cautious about Stevie. Yes, it's a risk. I don't really think there's a managerial appointment that isn't. I think people use that word as like to indict Stevie a little bit, like, oh, it's a risk, it's a risk, it's a risk. Everything in football is every signing, every manager, every kick of the ball is in itself a risk, but some are more calculated than others, and that's what this comes down to. Is hopefully that the board have calculated this one and have been clever with it. Purslow didn't get it quite right at Liverpool with his managerial appointments. It was Hodgson and Brendan Rodgers and stuff like that. But he did bring in one Antonio Conte into Chelsea, and I don't think that ended too badly. So for every Rodgers, there is a Conte. So hopefully we've got ourselves a Conte right.
Absolutely, mate. I couldn't have put it better myself. So hopefully, guys, if this one is to happen, I think it's one that we all need to get behind from the get-go. Any talk of ripping up season tickets, just grow up. Like we can't write off a manager before he's even started. And let us know what you thought about this sort of analysis and breakdown in the comments. Let us know what you're most excited for about Stevie G potentially taking charge of Aston Villa. I'd just like to say a massive thank you to all the support on the latest podcast. It was a really tough one to do, Dan. So it's good to see that there was a lot of love and support on the Dean Smith episode. Again, nothing but love for Dean Smith. I feel like we have to say that at the end of this,
Sure.
Dan. Dean's the man. Dean's the man. But Stevie G's Clark Blue Army, I think some exciting times are coming ahead, Dan. So yeah, let us know if you want Steven Gerrard in the comments below as well. Say if you enjoyed, hit the like button, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe for more. Up the Villa.